Welcome to the Success Talk Show, the podcast for ambitious leaders who want to get their best results and create a workplace for their teams to thrive. Each week, we share practical advice to help you accelerate your success and grow as an inspiring leader. Now, here's your host, Leadership Success Coach, Donna Siriani.
Welcome to another episode of the Success Talk Show. This is Donna Siriani, Leadership Success Coach and founder of Success Compass Academy. And my special guest today is Lisa Reinhold. Lisa is the Vice President of Customer and Network Success at Tracelink, a technology company that works with life science supply chain companies, protecting patients and saving lives. Now, Lisa and her teams are transforming the way the industry does business by providing innovative track and trace solutions. And prior to Tracelink, Lisa has been the VP of several customer service and professional services organizations, always with a clear focus on innovation. So welcome, Lisa.
Hi, Donna.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to you today.
Looking forward to talking to you as well.
You know, I will tell those of you that are listening that I've worked with Lisa before. We worked together at Smart Bear Software, and so I've seen her in action. I know what a really effective and strong leader she is. So she was really the first person I thought of to have this particular conversation with.
Well, thank you, Donna. And I've always enjoyed working with you and exchanging ideas, and you've always been someone who's energized and motivated me personally.
Oh, thanks, Lisa. And so one of the things I know about you, and when I've seen you in action, it was, in Boston, in Florida, in Russia. I mean, I've seen you consistently show up as a strong and effective leader. And one of the things I know you're passionate about, and this is what I wanted to talk to you about today, is creating high-performance teams. And you're somebody I really know that we all can learn from. So I'd love it if you could share some key strategies. What are the strategies you've used to accomplish this in the past?
Boy, that's a great question, Donna. Over the years, working with service and support organizations, I've developed an approach that has helped me and worked for me in many different situations. And one of the first things I do when going into any new situations, because typically you're going into a situation where there's an existing team and existing processes, existing systems, existing organizational structure. So the first thing, of course, I focus on is the people. Really learning and understanding, do I have the right people in the right roles? Are there any gaps? Am I missing key roles? So when going into a new situation, typically I would interview all the existing team. I would interview anyone who works closely with that team, interview customers, all in order to help me understand, do we have the right people in the right roles? And do we have any gaps in terms of roles or skills that's needed to be successful? Mm-hmm. The next thing I focus on is then I focus on the organizational structure. Do we have the right structure in place to best support our customer? And it varies based on the type of industry you have, your customer needs, customer requirements, and the types of products and services you're delivering. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, I look at all the systems and processes and understand, are these systems helping our team members be successful? Are those processes getting in the way, or are they actually supporting what we need to do to be successful? So looking and evaluating all the systems and processes, and with the goal to create an environment with each person is highly leveraged and optimized by using the right systems with the right amount of process to ensure quality and consistency. And then, of course, supported by that organizational structure that enables quick decision-making and helps empower the organization.
Yeah, and I've seen you, like I said, I've seen you do this over a period of time where you really took a very small team that seemed kind of fragmented, and you were trying to basically transform the team, create a new organization with a really powerful mission for the company, really creating the function almost from scratch. And you brought in a remarkable number of people. And so I've seen you. In fact, it almost seemed like, not magic, but like all of us, like more and more people just kept showing up as part of the organization. Like, how does she do this? And so I know you've always made it a top priority to bring in, and you did. You brought in fabulous people. So I'd love to hear, that's something that I see most leaders struggle with, is how to find top talent, what to do to bring in the best people. So what are some of the challenges that you faced, and how have you tackled that?
That's another great question. I think that I'm going to give you a really simple answer to this question. It's actually not as daunting as you might think. What I found is the biggest challenge that I've watched managers struggle with in every single organization I've been in is the fact that they don't fully embrace that hiring is job number one. Even though intellectually, I believe they understand that, most managers actually don't treat it as a priority. And quite frankly, how can you build a high-performance team without a team?
Right. And I can understand it, having been in those shoes in operational roles for most of my career, many, many years, where, some days your hair's on fire and the last thing you're thinking about is, let me get a jump on the hiring. If you don't have an open rack, you're not currently actively recruiting, you kind of put it on the back burner. And you're really not in that continuous cycle of, trying to make contacts, find good people. You do it when all of a sudden you have a rec. But what I've learned about you is really your philosophy seems to be that you seem to always be looking for top talent, even when you don't have an open rec. Is that right?
Oh, that's a great point. And actually, to build on that, it's funny you say that because you're exactly right. The environment today, the work environment is so fast paced that you can lose a great candidate simply by not aggressively scheduling interviews, right? By sort of just letting them happen or find that next convenient open spot in everyone's calendar. Whereas if you kept the interview process moving quickly, if you felt urgent about that issue, that there was a clock ticking, then it could result in hiring a great candidate. And what happens is if you're not hiring and your rec goes late, and let's say you're late in hiring, now you feel more and more pressure to just take the best candidate you see next versus finding the best candidate for the role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For me personally, when I've done hiring and then, obviously when I'm with my colleagues like except you're more proactive than most people I've seen. Now, there's sort of two sets of hiring, and I'm curious if you approach them differently. One is when you're in a somewhat of a larger organization and you're building your own reputation as a leader, and then it comes time that you have some job openings, promotions, things that you could offer as opportunities. My first thought was always, have I established enough of a good reputation for myself and my team that others in the company would want to come join us? And there's that internal marketing. And then there's the typical recruiting, which is you're really going out trying to find good candidates. Who do you know from your personal network, people you've met, maybe using recruiters and so on. So I'm just curious how you treat those two different scenarios.
Interesting question. From an internal perspective, I actually, being a services organization and you have technical support, which sometimes can be an entry-level position for some folks coming into a service organization, I think of it as the other way around. I almost consider my organization sometimes the farm team for the rest of the company because I want people to grow in their career and to develop. And then, from a support and services position, you could go in many directions. You could go in a more technical direction towards QA and engineering or product management. You could go into a more product-oriented position like a product marketing or pure marketing position. You could go into a sales position or a more business-focused or managerial position. And I love that because I know those team members have a great background and understanding for a product and a very practical understanding of our product and how our the value customers receive from our products. So for me, that's a win-win. So that's on the internal front. That's not to say that I haven't had people from other organizations transfer into my team. That does happen. But that's not typically a focus of mine.
Yeah, and I just want to comment on that. I think, Lisa, that is a brilliant point, and I just want to amplify it for a second because I was at a point in one company I worked at where we were restructuring, and one of the things we really wrestled with is, to your point, with the teams we had who were first-line support, basically answering the phones and emails for, say, 5,000, we call them tickets, right? 5,000 tickets or calls a month. And we were kind of wrestling with, should we, we wanted a balance of hiring people who would stay in that first level support, who could become senior and progress, team lead, et cetera, but who really loved that interaction with the clients. And at some point we realized, and we had to own up to, we were the pipeline for the company, exactly what you're saying. And if you fast forward, many of the people that we hired and trained, they became the experts on the products. They became, and everybody in the company wanted them to join their teams, whether it was sales, QA, product management, and so on, all the other functions, because those individuals were now worth gold because they had so much knowledge. But we had to come to terms with that, because then what it required is a different focus on recruiting. Just know that that person you recruit is the life of that person is probably going to only be with you for, less than 2 years. Probably when they hit the 18 to 24 month mark, they're probably going to be moving on. And we had to build our process for onboarding, recruiting and onboarding and training with that in mind, so that we didn't fight it. We actually embraced it and said, you know what, we're going to internally just recognize this is one of our roles in the company. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, that's a perfect point, Donna. And that's exactly what you have to do. You have to recognize those trends and those patterns and embrace them and build them into your process.
Mm-hmm. And now I just want to share a quick quote with you, Lisa, because I thought of you last night. I was traveling home from a conference and I grabbed Entrepreneur magazine in the airport, and I was reading through, and then one of the very first articles is called Create a Thriving Team. And there was a quote here. Trying to think, it was the founder of LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman, who interviewed like 6, major entrepreneurs. And this one entrepreneur, he was the CEO of Airbnb, Brian Chesky. And here's what he said. This is the quote. "There are 1,000 things to know to start a company, but there are only 2 things that matter. Build a product people love and hire amazing people." He says, "I'd spend more time on those and less time worrying about the incremental ideas on traction, raising money, etc." So anyway, I just read that last night and I thought of you because I know how passionate you are about find amazing people.
Absolutely. So if you think about that, and if managers really think about where they're spending their time, there are a few things, behavioral things that you change. So for example, if truly hiring is your number one priority, finding great team members. One, to your point earlier, you're always looking, right? Whether you always have your eyes open, because you never know when you're going to come across a great person and that person's going to be available. So you're always looking. Then with my managers, there are 3 real simple things I share with them just to make it real. One is, I always tell them, you own your candidate pipeline. You own it. HR doesn't own it. No one else owns it. Your recruiter doesn't own it. You own it. If your pipeline is low, it's your responsibility to leverage all the resources available to you, whether that's internal and HR. We have an internal recruiting team, or whether you use agencies, but also existing employees and your own personal network. Make sure you're leveraging all of those folks, and they're leveraging and reaching out to everyone they know to bring in talent. So that's extremely important. So this idea that you own it, not someone else, right? Because it's easy to say, well, I haven't hired because. How often have you heard my pipeline's dry? I need HR to work on that.
Exactly. So I love that, the accountability.
But when you own it, guess what? You have to work on that. Right? So it changes the way you think about the process, the way you act in terms of building that pipeline. Take more personal responsibility. Secondly, is when you have a candidate who's, passed you have a good screening process in place, they've passed your screening process, you have to assume that that candidate has an offer in hand that they're considering, so that you create the right level of urgency in how you schedule. When you schedule the interview process, the urgency you show around it. When a candidate, if someone says, well, we can meet in 2 weeks, I say, well, what about tomorrow morning? Can you have breakfast, or can you meet right after work? Or what if I drive to you? Come up with options instead of prolonging that process.
Well, Lisa, what I love about that is that you're also showing your commitment as a leader, and you're tipping your hand and showing more of yourself of what would it be like to work with you? If you were my boss or you're head of the organization, and I'm learning about you, your style, your communication, how you treat people, how you treat me. And so you're also making a great impression of your commitment to building this team, and potentially your commitment to me. So I think that's really a fantastic approach.
And then the last thing I'll mention, and I don't know if you've seen this, Donna, I'd be interested to hear, but at least in my experience, because I've been in a lot of executive management meetings where we're reviewing the stats around HR and how many people we have targeted to hire, every month, every week, and how many we actually hire. And 90% of the requisitions don't get hired on time. So what I tell my managers is, I encourage you, and I would rather you come to me with a candidate that you would like to hire early than to ever fill a position late.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And Lisa, so in terms of when you and I work together and what I've seen just in general, I would say when someone like you who takes that approach that it's your responsibility, not HR, that's where I've seen the most success. So even just when you and I were working together, if I think of the specific leaders who hired quickly, hired a lot of people, they were out there combing their personal network, looking for employee referrals, and they did the work. They rolled up their sleeves. They did not just dump it on an HR recruiter, right? They really took an active role. So that was really, to me, that was the number one differentiator. The second differentiator is that sense of urgency. The leader recognizing if you get that person in on your team sooner, how's that going to impact the work of the team in terms of bandwidth, capabilities, skill sets? And so if the hiring manager doesn't make it a top priority, they're always a little bit behind, right? Because the team really needs that extra skill set and bandwidth. So I've seen that correlate. Now, the only other thing that I would say is what differentiates some organizations is when they actually have the employee to tap into the networks of the employees. If you already have the start of an amazing team, they all have a network. So tapping into who knows somebody, who have you worked with at other companies that you would love to come and work here with us. That is powerful.
Yeah, and I've seen the same thing. So I tap my network and I encourage my team to tap their network. So one, you got to lead by example, of course, and they see me tapping my network and reaching out, and they'll do the same. And I just want to share this story with you just because it's really, I smile when I think about it because it really exemplifies this example of owning your pipeline. Sometimes you do have a role that's really challenging to fill. And we have one of those right now that we're trying to fill. And there we need someone who has a certain level of technical skills along with a certain language skill set. And it's been just extremely challenging to fill to the point where the manager who's trying to fill this role actually went out to associations, churches, dojos, over and beyond to try and tap into places where someone who speaks this language, we might find them or at least make connections and network to find someone with the skill set. So it just made me smile to hear that they were being really creative, thinking about where can I tap into folks who would have this certain set of language skills.
I love that. That is so good. Well, there you go, Lisa, because that's that accountability of not putting that challenge on someone else, but saying, I'm going to roll up my sleeves and take a unique approach on this. I love that. So Lisa, you mentioned earlier that, and I loved your perspective that, assume that the candidate you're interviewing has an offer already in their hand. So in this competitive environment, what I'd love to know is, how are you making the job desirable, your work environment desirable, so that if you decide this candidate is someone you really want on your team, you want them to choose your offer, not that other offer. So I'm just curious what your strategies are.
We have a number of things we think about when we're interviewing a candidate. One of the things that a candidate leaves Tracelink with from a perception perspective is because we do treat interviews very urgently, they actually feel like we do value them as a candidate and the position that they're interviewing for, which is extremely important. How many times have you been in an interview process where it takes weeks to get the next interview or you don't hear anything about what's going on and it's just this long drawn out process? How does that make you feel as a candidate? It makes you feel like either one, they're not interested in you, or two, this role isn't very important. Neither of which is a great feeling from a candidate perspective. One thing that is just an outcome of treating the whole process with more urgency actually gives the candidates a better feeling, leaving your organization with a better feeling about the company, even if you don't extend an offer. And I think that's another thing that's extremely important. We want every candidate we interview to have a great experience. And this is something that's not just something I believe in, but that we believe in our company. From the time that they're greeted to making sure we're on time with the interviews, making sure that, we take care of them. We think of their time and their experience and make sure we give them some breaks, et cetera, to make sure that they're comfortable. Also just stressing that, this interviewing process is a two-way street. This is really, it's important for them to evaluate us in the same way as we're evaluating them. We encourage them to ask questions. We encourage them to learn more about our company. We want to make sure that we share our mission statement and our values with each candidate because we really do believe in them and practice them. And we also want to make sure they have a clear picture of what the day in the life of someone in that role that they're considering, what that looks like, and make sure that's aligned with their expectations and with something that they're passionate about. And if that's something I learned from you, Donna, is if you're passionate about something, you're going to enjoy that so much more, and you're going to spend more time doing it, and you're just going to be happier in that position.
I don't know if you and I ever talked about this before, but it was actually when we were working together, I was speaking with some recruiters and asking them, what was the number one reason that a candidate did not work out? And unanimously, they would say culture, company culture. So if the values, like you were saying, if how we operate, our values, if that individual is not a good fit for them, it's usually the number one reason that an opportunity doesn't work out, which I thought was fascinating. So I'm thrilled to hear that you share, which doesn't surprise me about you, but that you share all that on the interview.
That is fascinating. One of the things we also do when we're looking for top talent and we're trying to make sure there's a great fit is in the interviewing process, ensuring that, it's not just an interview process, but we also integrate activities that help us understand more about that person. If they do indeed have the right skills or the right approach or the right demeanor, whatever those characteristics we're looking for, ensuring that they do have that and provides us more insight to whether they do or not. So, for example, if we're interviewing for a training position or a customer success manager position, we'll actually have those candidates come in and do a brief training session, 5-10 minutes on any topic of their choice, or a brief presentation of a product or of a program, so that we can get a better feel for, one, how do they prepare for a presentation? How good are they with the technology that they're using to deliver the presentation? How do they present, of course? And then also, how do they handle questions and the interaction with the folks who are at the presentation? So we're able to get a view of that. And in situations, I've had situations where one candidate may have been leading going into that presentation, and coming out of it, we had a very different outcome. So it's very important to not only have an interview process, but also, where possible, integrate some of these other activities that can give you some more insight to the candidate's strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, and that's brilliant. And I do know, that's why I wanted to ask you these questions, because you brought in, when you and I were working together, and I know at Tracelink you're doing the same, but you bring in fantastic talent. You've hired like superstars. So it doesn't surprise me how thorough and engaging you are in the process. Now, if somebody's listening who doesn't put as much effort into it, but this is, inspiring them to do that, think about the time you put up front, how much you save at the back end. If you were to hire somebody who's not a good fit for the team, it affects perhaps whether the team is going to work well together, affect your clients, your business. It's a huge impact if you make a bad choice. And it also takes a really long time, in most cases, to correct it. So the time that you invest up front, I've seen, you in action. I've seen how it really pays dividends. But thank you for sharing that, because I'm not sure I realized. I knew you had people come in, if it's a technical hands-on role. I remember you doing, I don't want to say testing, but coding, or there were some exercises and things you were doing. But I don't think I really knew the extent of what you were doing, like the presentations, the training. I don't think I knew all of it, but I think it's fantastic.
Right. Well, we certainly try to, and if it's a technical role, we have some technical exercises, problem-solving exercises that we'll pose, and we try to make them generic, so you don't necessarily have to come in with a certain specific set of knowledge, but it just gives us a feel for how you think, how you approach problems, how you prepare. Many times, it's not about, we can teach people certain knowledge, but we can't necessarily teach people how to think. Or how to organize, or how to, the approach to problems. That's something that's sort of specific to the individual. So really trying to understand that better and get better insight, and for some positions is very, very important.
Clearly. And I was going to ask you, but you really just answered it, because I've seen how many fabulous people you've brought into the organization. I was going to say, how do you know a candidate's a good fit? And you really just answered that. You're spending more time with them, and you're seeing them in action and seeing them put their knowledge and skills to use to some extent. So that's really taking it, much further than I would say most people do. So I think that's great. Is there anything else you want to add on that?
Yeah, there's probably the one other thing I would add is we also ensure in the interview process that we do what I'll call sort of a 360 interview. What I mean by that is we'll have someone who is currently doing that role interview. We'll have the person who would manage that role interview the person. We'll have a person who maybe manages that whole organization interview the person. And we'll have someone who works in another organization but works very closely with that role, interview the person. We use scorecards that we come up with for each role just as guideposts, not to make it quantitative, but just as guideposts to make sure everyone's thinking about all the key characteristics we're looking for that role, other than we give them the job description, but we also try to create a score sheet, if you will, or card for people then to use as a guidepost as they're talking, so that we have a way to score each candidate, especially in roles where we're interviewing, a high volume of candidates. But by having all of those different folks interview from the different roles, you really get a great perspective overall, because some people, people are looking for different things. So you'll get a more complete picture of how this candidate might fit within the organization. It's really helpful to do that, to uncover early concerns that, to your point earlier, you may have overlooked if you just had someone who the manager interview that person, for example, and they made a decision in a vacuum. You may not have uncovered something that someone who is doing the role would have uncovered.
Right. Yeah, I like that approach, Lisa. In fact, it's funny. You just reminded me of a funny story. When you and I were working together, this happened with somebody we knew, but they were interviewing candidates for a position, but there wasn't alignment across the individuals doing the interviewing. So like to your example, there were 5 or 6 people, different parts of the organization. They're all going to interview the candidates, but they weren't in agreement at the beginning of what they were looking for, even though they all had the job description. So I sat down with them and made sure we had that scorecard. I don't remember what we called it, but that type of, what's the must have and the nice to have? Because when they got together to talk about candidates and how the interviews were going, they were just all over the place. So without some structure and some priorities, must have, nice to have, how are we going to score these candidates? They just couldn't come to agreement. So we had to institute some structure so that group interviewing was much more productive. So I applaud you for having that scorecard type of approach, because that can really address a lot of the disconnects. And it just is so much more valuable. I remember being interviewed. I'm thinking there's one particular job years ago. I think I had 17 interviews, which seemed like overkill. But by the time I joined the company, I met so many interesting people. I might have 5 interviews in a day, come back for another 5 and another 5. But as an outsider coming in, the positive part of it was I now knew all of these people and had a little sense of personality, and it gave me a better sense of the company.
I do think you get a different glimpse from each different person you speak to, a glimpse of the company and what it means to them and their perspective, which, is great for someone who's interviewing and trying to evaluate their next opportunity.
In fact, I got to tell you a funny story. I was in Boston. I don't remember when this was, but let's just say it was a couple months ago. I was in Boston in the financial district, and I ran into a guy who was one of those 17 people that interviewed me. And we hadn't seen, we both had left the company a while ago. This was an interview from like 15 years ago. And we gave each other the big hug, because we worked together for quite a while. I'm like, how's it going? I'm like, I still remember that interview question you asked me back 15 years ago. He asked me, what would your fifth grade teacher have said about you? I'm like, what? And actually, I did know how to answer that question because she had called my mother in on a parent-teacher conference because she was worried I was too shy and I never spoke up. And she was worried that I would not be successful in life because I was too quiet and too shy. Now, obviously, I've overcome that.
See you now.
But anyway, it was an interview question that I laughed about. And I'm like, I just saw him. I'm like, I'll never forget that. But anyway, you do get to know people in a variety of ways. And so I think that your exposure, because you're letting that candidate see the company through the eyes of these different individuals, because they get to ask each person their questions, right? What's it like to work here? What do you like about working here? And you need to make sure that those individuals are aware of that they are ambassadors, of Tracelink. Thank you for spending time with me today. I have one last question, and this is kind of a big question, but I'm just really, really curious with everything you've done. When you look back at your career, is there something that you wish you'd known earlier? Any sort of lesson learned that stands out for you you'd love to share with those who are listening, who really they're aspiring to grow their own leadership capabilities? Anything you want to share?
Well, I guess I'm probably going to sound like a broken record here, but from the perspective of hiring, be sure to begin your search early. And it's better to ask for the right candidate to start early than to be late hiring. And the longer the position's open, the higher the pressure is to settle for just an okay candidate. For me, that has made the biggest difference in everyone I've managed, everyone I've worked with. They said, when I go back and I see them later, when I talk to them, they said that actually had the biggest impact on their career because it allowed them to be successful because they were able to build their teams quickly and be successful in doing that because they paid attention to hiring.
Nice. I love it. And so, Lisa, if someone's listening who would like to reach out to you, what's the best way to connect with you?
The best way to connect would be definitely on LinkedIn. I love to learn, take every opportunity to learn from others and network, and I'd love to share my experiences.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much. Shared so many good strategies and tips today. Thank you so much. For those of you who are listening, if you found this episode valuable, be sure to not only subscribe to the podcast, you can go into iTunes and click on subscribe, but also I would love to have you go over to ratings and review and leave feedback. Thank you for listening and have a great day.